Pam Bondi just said 3 words that silenced the entire room. What happened in this hearing was not supposed to go this way. Pam Bondi walked into that room with a prepared defense. She had her answers ready. She had her team behind her, and for the first few minutes, everything looked under control. Then Ted Lieu asked a question. Not a complicated question. Not a trick. Just a direct, simple question about a specific document that had been circulating for weeks. And Pam Bondi said 3 words. 3 words that stopped the entire hearing. The room went silent. Members of the committee looked at each other. Even the people sitting behind Bondi shifted in their seats. Because those 3 words didn't answer the question, they buried it. And in doing so, they created a much bigger problem than the original question ever was. We're going to break down exactly what happened. The document, the question, the answer. And why legal analysts are saying this moment could define the entire investigation going forward. But first, let's go back to how this hearing even started. Because the setup matters. Pam Bondi was called to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. The subject, the handling of sensitive federal documents related to an ongoing investigation that has been contested by both parties for over a year. For months, critics have been saying the same thing, that certain documents were being withheld. That specific requests for transparency were being delayed, redirected, or simply ignored. And that someone, at the top, had made a decision about what the public was allowed to see. Bondi had denied this, repeatedly, in press statements, in written responses to committee requests, and in prior appearances before Congress where the questions, frankly, were softer. This time was different, because this time, Ted Lieu came with paper. Representative Ted Lieu, Democrat from California, sat at the far end of the committee table. He had a folder in front of him. Nothing unusual about that. Congress members always bring folders. But this folder was different. Inside it was a single document. A document that, according to sources familiar with the investigation, had been specifically requested by the committee 7 weeks earlier. A document that the department had acknowledged existed. A document that had never been turned over. Lieu didn't open the folder right away. He let Bondi finish her opening statement. He let the first round of questioning proceed. He watched as she deflected, clarified, and reframed. Then it was his turn. He looked down at his notes. He looked up at Bondi. And he asked one question. Attorney General Bondi, are you aware of the contents of the documents submitted to this committee on March 4th, referencing internal communications between senior DOJ officials and the Office of the Deputy Attorney General? Not a long pause. Maybe 2 seconds. But in a congressional hearing, 2 seconds is a lifetime. Then she said it. That matter is classified. 4 words, technically, but 3 that mattered. Matter is classified. The room did not erupt. It didn't need to. The silence said everything. Because here is what those 3 words actually meant in that context, and why the people in that room understood immediately what had just happened. The document Lieu was referencing was not classified. It had already been described in public filings. It had been cited in the Congressional Research Service memo. And critically, it had been partially quoted in a letter sent by the committee to the Department of Justice 6 weeks prior. You cannot classify a document that is already impartially released. You cannot retroactively apply classification to material that has already been acknowledged in public record. Legal experts watching the hearing in real time began flagging this within minutes. But Bondi didn't know that Lieu knew that, or maybe she did. And she said it anyway. Either scenario is a problem. That's what made the next 60 seconds so extraordinary. He opened the folder. He placed the document on the table in front of him, visible to the cameras. He looked directly at Bondi and said calmly, "Attorney General, I'm holding a copy of the document you just described as classified. It was attached as Exhibit C to our March 4th communication to your office. Our office received it from a former DOJ employee. It has never been marked classified. It has never been designated classified. And your office's own cover letter, which I also have here, does not describe it as classified. He paused. So, I'd like to ask again. Are you aware of the contents of this document? Her counsel leaned in. A whispered exchange. Several seconds. Then Bondi looked back at Lieu. I'd need to review the specific document before I could characterize its classification status. Lieu nodded slowly. So you're saying you don't know if it's classified? Another pause. I'm saying I'd need to review it. But you just told this committee it was classified. No answer. In legal terms, what happened in that exchange is called a prior inconsistent statement. You say something is true, then you're confronted with evidence that makes your statement impossible to sustain, and then you retreat. The retreat itself becomes the story. Because if Bondi genuinely didn't know the document's classification status, then she made a false statement to Congress when she said it was classified. That is a federal crime. And if she did know, if she was aware that the document had never been classified, then she deliberately lied to a congressional committee under oath. That is also a federal crime. There is no version of what happened in that room that doesn't require a serious follow-up question from the Department of Justice's own Office of Inspector General. And the committee knows this, which is why, within 2 hours of the hearing ending, the ranking member submitted a formal referral requesting an OIG review of Bondi's testimony. Let's talk about what that document actually contains, because this is where the story goes somewhere most people weren't expecting. The document in question is an internal communication chain between 2 senior officials at the DOJ. It dates to a period of significant internal dispute over the handling of a specific investigative matter, a matter that has been the subject of congressional inquiry for well over a year. What the document shows, according to the former DOJ employee who provided it to the committee, is a deliberate decision made at a senior level to delay the production of materials that had been legally requested. In other words, someone decided to slow-walk a federal document, and the person who signed off on that decision, according to the communication chain, was operating with knowledge of a congressional deadline, meaning the delay wasn't accidental. It wasn't bureaucratic. It was a choice. The committee has known about this document for weeks. They've been building toward this moment, and Bondi walking into that hearing room and calling it classified, without checking, without verifying, without apparently being briefed on what Liu already had in his folder, was either a catastrophic failure of preparation or something worse. After the hearing, Liu spoke to reporters in the hallway. He didn't grandstand. He didn't predict indictments. He said something more measured, and in some ways, more damaging. We asked a straightforward question. We received a false answer. We have the receipts. The committee will determine next steps. That's it. No theatrics, just the receipts. And that framing matters. Because Liu is a former federal prosecutor, he knows what receipts means in an investigative context. He didn't use that word by accident. What comes next is likely a formal document production demand. A deadline. And if the deadline is missed or contested, a subpoena. This hearing was not the end of something. It was the beginning of a much more serious confrontation between this committee and the Department of Justice. Here is what you need to understand about the broader context. The fight over these documents is not just about paperwork. It's about accountability for decisions that were made at the highest levels of federal law enforcement during an extraordinarily politically charged period. The people who want those documents released believe they contain evidence of political interference in federal investigations. The people who are resisting their release say the documents involve sensitive law enforcement methods that cannot be disclosed publicly. Both things can be true. And both things have been argued. In courts, in committee rooms, and now in this hearing. But what cannot be argued is this. You do not get to call something classified when it isn't. You do not get to make that claim under oath before a congressional committee and then walk it back when confronted with the actual document. That's not a political question. That's a legal one. And Pam Bondi now has to answer it. 3 words. That's all it took. Not a dramatic explosion. Not a shouting match. Not a viral clip of someone losing their composure. Just 3 words spoken too quickly, without enough preparation, in front of a congressman who already had the answer in a folder on his desk. That matter is classified. And the moment those words left the room, the entire hearing changed. The committee has the document, they have the testimony. And now they have the contradiction on the record, on the